Hi, my name is Leivys Garcia. I am a student at Hofstra University, currently triple majoring in writing studies, political science, and global studies. My presentation today is on how can we make the Writing Center more conducive towards cross-cultural sessions. So a little bit about me and why I was interested in cross-cultural sessions is because from a very young age, I was about 3 or 4 years old, I immigrated to the United States. And I was in ESL up until about second grade. Got out of it by like third grade when I really started perfecting my English around that time period in elementary school. And I didn't really get into writing or like writing up until around high school. And then I became a major at Hofstra University. And as a major, I decided I would go into the Writing Center and work as a writing tutor. And in order to become a tutor at the Hofstra University Writing Center and at many other writing centers across the country, you have to pass a pedagogy class. That's kind of like the one certification you need. Um, and so I think the Writing Center itself, these two photos from our Writing Center kind of help visualize what it is we learn in the pedagogy class and what the pedagogy class kind of wants to accomplish. Um, so in the pedagogy class, we really learn a lot about the different tactics and methods that tutors should be using within their sessions. So we learn a lot of collaborative learning, like you see on this picture on my left. Um, this picture over here. So it's basically the idea that you're working with the student. You're not just looking at this paper and writing down all these things that you think they should fix. It's you're working alongside them, meeting them where they're at. Um, it's not just you need to fix this, this, and this. It's over here, there's something we can look at. What do you think we should do? Um, and then really helping them develop their writing skills as opposed to just telling them what's wrong. We do a lot of learning how to make the center more inviting and sessions more inviting, and we like to do that a lot physically with the center. As you can see, we like to decorate it for the holidays. Right now it is currently full of hearts and red and pink everywhere for Valentine's Day, and the students really like it because it makes it more warming and inviting for them. We also learn a lot of strategic building, how to build certain strategies and almost like your own tutor curriculum when it comes to approaching papers that will make you and certain specific students more comfortable. How to use transferable skills. What do you learn in certain disciplines, majors, or in your daily life that will be beneficial to your sessions or you as a tutor. And I think one of my favorite, or what most of the tutors found to be one of the most influential and important documents or articles that we use in the pedagogy class, was Joe Makiewicz and Isabel Thompson's article on motivational scaffolding and politeness. And their concepts of motivational scaffolding and politeness are basically that one, you want to motivate the student, and the way to do that is by making your sessions very casual and less rigid. So, and the way that they kind of say that tutors should be doing that is through common discourse and lingo. So as opposed to using these really cumbersome academic or really rigid words, or very, stubborn or very rigid faces, you kind of want to be very casual with them. You want to have a conversation. Most of us tutors, what we find is we use a lot of common lingo. So we don't want to be really, we're not lecturing them. We're kind of talking to them as if we're like best friends almost. So we'll use common words and like pop culture phrases and things that we, like internet lingo is what it's some people call it. So like instead of saying, I don't really like what's going on here, this is kind of rough over here, you would say something like, this is not the vibe. I'm not really vibing with this over here. Common words that, you know, people of like our generation or certain part of certain discourses would understand. And that seems to be one of the best strategies that we've been using, that we've adopted from this article. And Makiewicz and Thompson do this really interesting little thing in their article right at the beginning. And they basically say that in planning our study, we recognize a challenge of accounting for cross-cultural differences and intention to use politeness and an uptake of politeness strategies. We thus limit our analysis here to L1, just American English Writing Center interactions. In other words, they their analysis completely neglects cross-cultural interactions because they're too complicated to really dive into when discussing the basics of politeness and motivational scaffolding. And that really got me thinking, like, Makiewicz and Thompson were the first ones to acknowledge that cross-cultural sessions exist. At least they were the first, or the only article we read that kind of did that. But like other articles on collaborative learning and all these strategy buildings completely refuse to even acknowledge that cross-cultural sessions are their own little enigma of itself within the Writing Center, tutoring sessions that we would have to deal with. And I think that's kind of something that we have completely missed in the pedagogy, is really acknowledging that cross-cultural sessions need their own attention given, or that when we have all of these interesting concepts like collaborative learning, strategy building, and motivational scaffolding, politeness, this common discourse, how do we employ that with cross-cultural sessions? Because most of the times we can't do that, because how do you even translate really niche language like fit check or vibe into another language, even if you know that language? These are words that are kind of selective to just American English speakers. And it kind of, for me, it really hit me. My very first in-person session was actually with an international student. And they came to me with a assignment on the concept of American psychology and social psychology of the American people. And the assignment was to be able to describe American psychology through one photo. So how does this photo represent American psychology? And this was the photo that this person chose to use. Which first is a really profound photo that is really deep, and can really, like, it's really, you can speak a lot to it in terms of like American psychology and social structure and social issues. But because this student was an international student, they weren't able to discuss all of that in their paper. Their paper was great content-wise. It was a good paper. It dealt with the photo, it dealt with the issues in the photo, but it didn't really dive into all those cultural things that we learn about all throughout our American education, about the American psychology, all these historical things, what certain hate groups signify in specifically the American context. So there was definitely a lot missing from that paper. And so what I learned from that is that cross-cultural sessions are not much more, that there's so much more in them than just the linguistic barrier. In fact, the linguistic barrier is actually the easy part to overcome. And that there's so much more beyond that. There is a cultural barrier, there's an educational barrier that exists there as well, that we as tutors were never prepared for, and frankly shouldn't be the ones doing it or dealing with. But because of the situation we're put in, and because in the Writing Center we get papers from an array of disciplines, we're almost forced to acknowledge educational parts from those disciplines in order, because we want the students to have the best paper possible once they leave our sessions. So it becomes a cultural barrier too, an educational barrier, where you have students who are expected to write these insanely well written papers, but cultural there's a lack of cultural knowledge that we as tutors now need to also be a part of. And one of the biggest things that in my writing center we've learned is that uh, in international in education elsewhere, the concept of plagiarism is very different than in the United States. So the concept of like intellectual property rights, like for us, we have to cite absolutely everything, wherever you get any numerical data, wherever you paraphrase, whenever, obviously, if it's like direct quotes, it needs to be cited. I have like research papers from my poli-sci classes where every other sentence has a citation attached to it. And in other countries, uh, the concept of intellectual property doesn't extend to paraphrasing, or it doesn't extend to numerical data. It's only, let's say it's only just direct quotations, or at least that's something that tutors in my writing center have noticed, is that most students won't understand that what they're writing or that their whole papers are filled with plagiarism because they were never taught the American standards of plagiarism. So now we're also becoming um, educators on that end too, and also had to deal with APA, MLA, and Chicago writing, which some of our tutors have never even had to write Chicago style writing. Now we have to also learn and teach that. Um, so it's much more, it's a much bigger beast to deal with in cross-cultural sessions, and all these much larger concepts that we as tutors have to really deal with, that the pedagogy classes don't really teach us, and that are mostly overlooked. Like, these are barriers that people really don't recognize in cross-cultural sessions. Um, and so how can we improve the cross-cultural session if most of the things that uh, are needed are not really taught to us? And most of the time, things like educational and cultural barriers are things that we as tutors aren't necessarily in charge of teaching, or that goes beyond our limitation of what we can do. Um, so definitely the importance of body language is the most obvious thing out there. Um, that's definitely something that needs to be really everyone kind of acknowledges it. It's the using of your hands and the facial expressions, and a lot of us don't really know how to employ it correctly in cross-cultural sessions, but it definitely is something that when we talk about that motivational scaffolding and politeness, where words kind of don't really work, your hands can do a lot of talking, and so can your face. And sometimes when, because you can't make a certain joke because the other person may not understand it, or you can't use common lingo, certain facial expression or hand gestures actually do cross those linguistic barriers and cultural barriers. So they definitely serve a lot more importance than most of us give them credit for. um, the integration of a unit on cross-cultural sessions for prerequisite tutoring courses is definitely a big need. We need to understand how to use collaborative learning, how to use motivational scaffolding and politeness in cross-cultural sessions, how to use certain discourse, and what it looks like to do a cross-cultural session. One thing I've learned in my cross-cultural sessions is that the common, in order to collaborate, you don't necessarily need to have this understanding of the person. It could be something that just comes up out of nowhere. One thing that happened in one session was a student had noticed I had a game that they played on my desktop, and we used that game as kind of a jumping point of, okay, we have this thing that we have in common, let's talk about it while we talk about the work. And kind of comparing, it was a really weird thing that we did. It was me having to talk about the content in terms of the game, and how trying to get them to organize certain things the way that you would in the game. So things like that, being able to employ all these other outside features into cross-cultural sessions. We definitely need to have some sort of preparation before tutors enter those sessions. And at the end of the day, it is an institutional issue most of the time, that international students do need a certain amount of resources when they are in American institutions. So we do need to push our institutions to provide more resources for international students. One thing that a lot of faculty tutors from other other institutions across the country that I've talked to have said is that their institutions have what are called like LibGuides, where the university's library will have this compiled set. So each teacher for each of their courses, or professor for each of their courses, will have this compiled set of extra content that they can give students, and some of those guides are actually designated towards international students who may not understand or certain cultural or educational concepts that are specific to American institutions or American education, and that they may be able to seek in order to better to perform better in the classrooms. And so with that ends my presentation. I hope you liked it, and thank you for tuning in.